Hey guys, I'm Ariana, and this is going to be part 5 of the BFG. Snozcumbers. But if you don't eat people like all the others, Sophie said, then what do you live on? That is a squelching, tricky problem around here, the BFG answered. In this slosh-flunking giant country, Happy eats like pineapples and pigwinkles is simply not growing. Nothing is growing except for one extremely icky poo vegetable. It is called the snozcumber. The snozcumber, cried Sophie. There's no such thing. The BFG looked at Sophie and smiled, showing about 20 of his square white teeth. Yesterday, he said, we was not believing in giants, was we? Today we is not believing in snozcumbers. Just because we happen not to have actually seen something with our two little winkles, we think it is non-existing. What about, for instance, the great squizzling Scotch hopper? I beg your pardon, Sophie said. The humplecrimp? What's that? Sophie said. The rapskull? The what? Sophie said. What about the crumpscoodle? Are they animals? Sophie asked. They is common animals, said the BFG. I is not very know-all giant myself, but it seems to me that you is an absolutely know-nothing human being. Your brain is full with rotten wool. You mean cotton wool? Sophie said. What I mean and what I say is two different things, the BFG announced, rather grandly. I will now show you a snozcumber. The BFG flung open a massive cupboard and took out the weirdest looking thing Sophie had ever seen. It was about half as long, again, as an ordinary man, but was much thicker. It was thicker round its girth as a perambulator. It was black and white stripes along its length, and it was covered all with coarse knobbles. Here is the repulsant snozcumber, cried the BFG, waving it around. I squoggle it. I mispise it. I dispunge it. But because I is refusing to gobble up human beings like the other giants, I must spend my life guzzling up icky poo snozcumbers instead. If I don't, I'll be nothing but skin and groans. You mean skin and bones? Sophie said. I know it is bones, the BFG said, but please understand that I cannot be helping it if I sometimes is saying things a little squiggly. I is trying my very best all the time. The big friendly giant looked suddenly so forlorn that Sophie got quite upset. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to be rude. There never was any schools to teach me talking in giant country, the BFG said sadly. But couldn't your mother have taught you? My mother, cried the BFG. Giants don't have mothers. Surely you know that. I did not know that, Sophie said. Whoever heard of a woman giant, shouted the BFG, waving the snozcumber around his head like a lasso. There was never a woman giant, and there will never be one. Giants is always men. Sophie felt herself getting a little muddled. In that case, she said, how were you born? Giants isn't born, the BFG answered. Giants appears, and that's all there is to it. They simply appears, the same way the sun and the stars. And when did you appear? Sophie asked. Now how on earth could I be knowing a thing like that? Said the BFG. It was so long ago I couldn't count. You mean you don't even know how old you are? No giant is knowing that, the BFG said. All I is knowing about myself is that I is very old, very, very old and crumbly, perhaps as old as the earth. What happens when a giant dies? Sophie asked. Giant is never dying, the BFG answered. Sometimes, and quite suddenly, a giant is disappearing and nobody is ever knowing where he goes to. But mostly us giants is simply going on and on like whiffsy time twiddlers. The BFG was still holding the awesome snozcumber in his right hand, and now he put one end into his mouth and bit off a huge hunk of it. He started crunching it up, and the noise he made was like the crunching of lumps of ice. It's filthy, he spluttered. speaking with his mouth full and spraying large pieces of snozzcumber like bullets in Sophie's direction. Sophie hopped around on the tabletop, ducking out of the way. It's disgusterous, the BFG gurgled. It's sickable, it's rotsome, it's maggotice. Try it yourself, this foulsome snozzcumber. No, thank you, Sophie said, backing away. It's all you're going to be guzzling around here from now on, so you might as well get used to it, said the BFG. Go on, you snipsy little winkle, have a go. Sophie took a small nibble. Ugh, she spluttered. Oh no, oh gosh, oh help. She spat it out quickly. It tastes of frog skins, she gasped, and rotten fish. Worse than that, cried the BFG, roaring with laughter. To me, it is tasting of cockroaches and slime wranglers. Do we really have to eat it? Sophie said. You do unless you is wanting to become so thin that you'll be disappearing into thick ear. Into thin air, Sophie said. A thick ear is something quite different. Once again, that sad, winsome look came onto the BFG's eyes. Words, he said, is oh such a twitch-twinkling problem to me all my life, so you must simply try to be patient and stop squibbling. As I am telling you before, I know exactly what words I am wanting to say, but somehow or other, they is always getting squiddled around. That happens to everyone, Sophie said. Not like it happens to me, the BFG said. I was speaking the most terrible wigglish. I think you speak beautifully, Sophie said. You do? Cried the BFG, suddenly brightening. You really do? Simply beautifully, Sophie repeated. Well, that is the nicest present anyone is ever giving me in my whole life, cried the BFG. Are you sure you is not twiddling my leg?